I found out I owed over $2 million linked to properties I'd never seen, contracts I'd never signed. Worse, the signature was mine, forged by my own mother, and my cousin Nathan living like royalty off accounts in my name. I'm a financial advisor, yet I was the perfect victim for my own family's betrayal. Fake signatures, stolen homes. And when I confronted them, my mother said it's just for the family. If you think this is just another family story, you're dead wrong. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next gripping emotional episode we bring you. Before I uncovered the truth, I believed helping family was the one thing you never had to double-check. I'm a financial strategist, not the kind you see on shiny magazine covers or behind CNBC news desks. I work in silence, discreet portfolios, hidden trusts, shadow capital. My job is to protect other people's futures, but I never thought I'd need protection from my own past, and definitely not from my family. The email came on a gray Thursday morning. Nothing dramatic, no lightning, no storm. Just a regular workday, my second espresso cooling next to two monitors stacked with spreadsheets. Then it arrived. Subject line redisbursement ready. Loan ID 445M EQ7. Sender legal.operations@nfcfund.com. Body. Hi, Ms. Quinn. As per Mrs. Lydia's instruction, please proceed with the second tranche disbursement. Total $175,000. Document attached with your signature. Kindly confirm. My breath caught mid-sip. Lydia. That's my mother's name. I clicked. The PDF opened like a trap. A legally binding agreement authorizing a multi-million-dollar loan collateralized against a real estate portfolio under my name. My signature in blue ink. My tax ID. My email listed as the primary guarantor. I hadn't signed a damn thing, but the signature, it looked real. Too real. I froze. That kind of freeze you don't even notice at first. The kind that starts in your lungs and spreads through your limbs until even your spine feels cold. I blinked twice. My cursor hovered over the document like it might detonate. I hit print. Then I opened my banking software. And that's when it all began to unravel. The dashboard loaded, and with it came the weight of 5 open credit lines, all active. All in my name. All supposedly authorized by Samantha Elina Quinn within the last 24 months. Each linked to a separate entity: Equinox Vista Holding, Trident, West Coast Development, Bridgepoint Wellness Retreat, and 2 others I didn't recognize. My pulse thudded against my temples. 173,000, 284,000, 619,000. I kept scrolling. The total balance outstanding across all accounts was just under $2.9 million. I closed the laptop. I closed my eyes. And I saw them. My mother, Nathan. I should have known. 2 years ago, Mom had asked me for a small favor. That's what she called it. A small favor. Something about needing my name on a property application for refinancing their house because her credit score had taken a dip. Said it would help her qualify for the bank's young borrower incentive. Nathan was there that day too. My cousin, her golden boy. Ivy League dropout turned real estate visionary. Always charming. Always one sentence ahead of a lie. We just need you to be a name on paper, Alina, he said, slicing mangoes at the kitchen island like a Michelin chef. It's technical. You won't be responsible for anything. You're the only one in the family who has a flawless record. I remember laughing. That's what haunts me most. I laughed. I believed them. I handed over a scanned copy of my ID and a signed authorization to help speed things up. Mom kissed my forehead. Nathan winked. That was the first account. Now there were 5. It's funny. We think we'll spot betrayal when it walks through the door, that it'll wear a villain's coat or speak with a harsh voice, but betrayal doesn't walk. It creeps. And sometimes it calls you darling. The sound of the printer finishing jolted me back. I pulled the warm sheets from the tray and placed them beside my coffee, which had gone cold. That night I didn't sleep. I scoured every document I could find, backtracked every loan, every entity. The names were cleverly masked, shell companies with vague descriptions. I knew how these things worked. I'd set up similar structures for clients protecting assets in divorces or hostile takeovers, but never had I imagined being the unknowing puppet in one. I kept coming back to one question: how long had they planned this? And how did I not see it coming? My father used to tell me when I was little, "The best crooks wear family ties." I never knew he meant that literally. Mom had always been difficult, not cruel, not outright malicious, just surgically strategic. And Nathan. He was a maestro of charm. I'd seen him talk a customs officer out of checking his bags once. I'd seen him lie to a girlfriend while smiling at her mother. The man could forge warmth better than a blacksmith-shaped steel. But I was the one with the spotless record. I was the leverage. I was the perfect scapegoat. At 4 a.m., I closed all files. I opened a new document. Title: Personal Exposure Summary, Quinn Holdings. It was time to treat this like what it was, a hostile takeover. And I was the asset under siege. I started building timelines, cross-referencing loan activation dates with phone calls, texts, family gatherings. There it was, a dinner last summer. Nathan had insisted I try this new Cabernet while subtly asking if I'd mind checking something on my Experian account real quick. Another time a rushed, "Can you resend that ID scan? I misplaced it." Innocent in isolation. But together, predatory. By sunrise, I'd mapped the entire architecture of their scheme across 2 spreadsheets and 1 vision board on my kitchen wall. At the center, me, flanked by Nathan's companies, funded by my signature, enabled by my mother's trust. I took a shower, put on a navy suit, and tied my hair back tighter than ever. Then I called NFC Fund. The receptionist was polite. I introduced myself not as the client, but as a financial strategist investigating irregularities on behalf of myself. I requested a call with their legal counsel. They hesitated. I insisted. 30 minutes later, a man named Leonard Harris came on the line. I introduced myself again, this time with authority. "My name is Samantha Elina Quinn. I believe my identity has been used to secure fraudulent financing through your institution. I'm requesting full disclosure under Article 9 of the Financial Protection Act, and I'd like to speak off record before I involve federal counsel." Silence, then a clipped breath. "We were under the impression you authorized all this. Your mother is the listed intermediary." And just like that, it became clear they had used the relationship mother and daughter as the ethical smokescreen. Nobody had verified independently. Nobody had thought to. Because who would believe a mother would do that to her own child? Leonard promised to look into it. I gave him 48 hours. But I wasn't going to wait. By noon, I was back at my firm, face pale but fire beneath the surface. I walked into the data vault and started pulling files. I wanted every single legal document I'd ever signed, notarized or authorized. I needed to distinguish real from forged fast. But before I left for the day, I did one last thing. I called my mother. "Hi, sweetheart," she answered, warm as honey. "I was just thinking about you." My voice didn't tremble. "Mom, I know about the loans." A pause. "Then what are you talking about?" "The properties, the fake entities, the signatures." Silence. Then, "Oh, Alina, don't make a mess out of nothing." That phrase, like a needle through my ear. Don't make a mess out of nothing. I was 2 seconds from screaming when I heard her next line. "I did it for us. You're successful. You have everything. Why not use it to help?" The worst part, she meant it. She genuinely believed that taking millions in my name, forging my identity, risking my entire career was helping. Helping who? I hung up without another word. Later that night, as I sat on the floor, surrounded by folders, bank statements, and shredded illusions, I whispered something to the empty room. I thought I was helping my family build stability. I stared at the signature again, mine, but not mine. They were building a kingdom on my shadow. And now it was time to bring that kingdom down. Brick by forged brick. I didn't sleep that night. Again. I kept seeing the email. The signatures, the loans, the silence after I confronted my mother. And more than anything, I kept hearing her voice. Don't make a mess out of nothing. But this wasn't nothing. It was $2.9 million, 5 open accounts, my name legally tied to companies I'd never touched, and a sense of betrayal I couldn't outrun. By sunrise, I had only one goal in mind: follow the paper trail. The documents listed 5 asset holding entities. One of them was registered as Quinn Executive Lodging, White House Division. I thought the name was just branding. It wasn't. At 7:32 a.m., I ran a property search on the address tied to it. The result stunned me. The White House wasn't metaphorical. It was real. A sprawling, all-white, ultra-luxury estate in Lake Arbor, just north of the city. 10 bedrooms, 8 baths, heated indoor pool, private spa, market value $4.6 million, and the ownership, Samantha E. Quinn, me. On paper, I owned the damn place. I stared at the screen, waiting for some explanation to fall out of the ether. Nothing came. Just the biting realization that not only had they used my name, they'd built an entire kingdom under it. At noon, I drove out there. The White House sat behind double iron gates guarded by security and a manicured hedge maze that screamed silent wealth. It didn't feel like a family business. It felt like something out of a luxury cartel's brochure. There were no signs, no phone numbers, no welcome mat, just clean gravel, a receptionist in a navy blazer, and 2 security cameras that tracked me from the moment I stepped out of my car. "Can I help you?" she asked, voice smooth but distant. I pulled my coat tighter. "Yes, I'm here regarding property management. I believe I'm listed as an owner." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "And your name is Alina Quinn." She froze for half a beat, then blinked back into script. "I'm afraid I don't have any appointment under that name, Ms. Quinn." I reached into my bag and pulled out the printed deed. "Then maybe you should check again. Because as far as the county is concerned, this property is under my name." Her eyes scanned it quickly, masking what I registered as a flicker of alarm. "I'll have to refer you to the board," she said, folding the paper and handing it back. "This isn't something we handle at reception. I'd like to speak to whoever is on site representing operations." She hesitated, then said, "You'll need to request that through Mrs. Lydia." Lydia, my mother. The receptionist continued, "She's currently listed as the managing director for the Quinn Family Trust, which oversees this facility." I stepped back. My head buzzed. "So, you know her?" She tilted her head. "Of course. Everyone here refers to her as Mrs. Quinn. She's the owner." "No, I'm the owner. On paper. But she's the name they know." My jaw clenched. "Tell her I stopped by." "She's not here today." "Still, tell her." I turned on my heel before I said something I couldn't take back. My skin burned. Not with shame, with fury. They were using me and hiding it behind first names and legal layers. They'd erased me from my own story. That night I didn't cry. I hired Clay Danner, a private investigator I'd worked with for high-profile asset tracing. Discreet, ethical, expensive. "I need eyes on a man named Nathan Devlin," I told him over the phone. "What am I looking for?" "Anything that moves," I said. "Properties, meetings, money, and any ties to someone named Lydia Quinn." He whistled low. "Sounds like family drama. More like family fraud." Clay didn't ask for more. Within 72 hours, he sent me a preliminary report. Nathan's lifestyle didn't match his tax returns. He drove a Bentley, lived in a condo overlooking Central Square. Just last month, he purchased a $78,000 Rolex and spent a weekend in Cabo with a known real estate developer currently under SEC scrutiny. None of it matched his declared earnings as a consultant. Worse, he was visiting the White House estate regularly accompanied by my mother and meeting behind closed doors with individuals whose names were ghost entries in public databases. Entities. shell companies, shifting names and capital. Clay sent me grainy stills from a private security cam he hacked into near the estate's loading dock. The images made me nauseous. There they were, Nathan and my mother, sitting on plush chairs under a heat lamp sipping wine with a man whose name appeared in offshore financial leaks. The timestamp, 2 weeks ago, the same week I received the disbursement email. It was all there, the connection between my family and something far darker than just loans. I sat in the dark that night, flipping through the photos one by one. My mother smiling at a man with a cigar, Nathan shaking hands with a woman in designer heels, all of them laughing, celebrating, on land I supposedly owned, with money they borrowed in my name. I whispered into the silence, "What the hell are you doing, Mom?" No one answered. Of course not. And yet I couldn't stop hoping this was all some horrible misunderstanding, that there'd be a message waiting in my inbox explaining everything away. A slip-up, a mix-up, a technicality. But there was only one new email. From my accountant. Subject urgent. Suspicious tax filings submitted under your SSN. I opened it, and all hope drained from me. Attached was a scanned 1099 filed by a company I'd never worked with, reporting a $320,000 consulting payment to me for the fiscal year prior, which meant they were also filing income under my name, which meant tax fraud, which meant federal. And yet somewhere inside, some broken part of me still whispered, maybe they didn't mean to. I shut the laptop, and I sat there, staring at the blank TV screen across from me. My reflection was faint, distorted in the black glass. Not the face of a victim, not the face of someone weak, but someone exhausted by being so goddamn strong for people who never earned it. I remembered a Christmas morning years ago, Nathan getting a trip to Aspen while I got socks. Mom saying Alina doesn't need much. She's practical. And I believed her. I let them shrink me. Because I thought success would earn me love. I thought if I made enough, achieved enough, gave enough, they'd stop lying. Stop taking. Stop hiding. I thought they'd finally let me in. The next morning, Clay called again. Got something big. Go! Nathan met with a real estate agent yesterday. Talked about liquidating some holdings from the Quinn Trust. Liquidating? Yeah. Specifically the White House. Asked how fast they could flip it under a shell buyer. He can't sell it, I said. It's in my name. Yeah, Clay said, voice dry. Guess who they're planning to list as the seller? I didn't answer. I pulled the docs. It's your name, Alina. With a power of attorney document. Signed. 3 months ago. My heart dropped. I never signed a power of attorney. Exactly. The silence between us stretched. Then I said, Clay, yeah, I want copies of everything. That night I poured myself a drink and stood in front of the window overlooking the city. Lights blinked. Cars moved like blood cells in asphalt veins. I felt disembodied, like I was watching someone else's life. And in a way I was, because they'd built a world around me. In my name, with my identity, my reputation, my record. I was their shell, their front, their cloak. I lifted the glass but didn't drink. Instead, I whispered to no one in particular. I always believed that if I became rich enough, they'd stop lying to me. I turned toward the kitchen, placed the glass in the sink. But I was wrong. They never stopped lying. They just got better at hiding it. And now it was my turn to uncover every damn piece of it. Piece by bloody piece. I hadn't stepped foot in my childhood home in almost 4 months. Not since Dad's death anniversary. But that day, I pulled into the driveway like I belonged, like this confrontation was overdue, and I was simply cashing in on decades of silence. The house looked the same from the outside. The kind of house that tries too hard to look warm. Shuttered windows painted teal, a bird feeder no bird ever visited, and a dying hydrangea bush Mom always swore she'd replace. I knocked once before walking in. She was at the kitchen island, sifting through a stack of glossy mailers, resort catalogs, spa retreats, a flyer for a yacht share in Croatia. Her robe was silk, her nails were freshly done. There was an untouched glass of Chardonnay next to her elbow. Alina, she said, as if I'd just returned from a jog. I didn't sit. didn't take off my coat. I placed the folder on the counter. She didn't even look up. What's that? You tell me, I said. She picked it up casually, flipping through the pages like she was browsing a brunch menu. Then she stopped at the loan document, the one from NFC Fund with my forged signature. Her lips pressed together in a faint theatrical smile. Then she said it. I only borrowed it temporarily. I thought you'd understand. No apology, no denial. Just, I thought you'd understand. I'm your daughter, I said, voice shaking. Not your personal line of credit. She gave a small laugh like I was being dramatic. Alina, you make more money than everyone else in the family combined. What's $2 million to you? You wouldn't even have noticed if that email hadn't slipped. That email, the one that detonated my illusion. You forged my signature, I said. She shrugged. You signed a general authorization 2 years ago. Nathan said it could hold up. That was for a mortgage application, not for funneling money through shell companies and hosting international investors in a spa mansion with my name on the deed. Her smile cracked. There it was, the shift. Her voice lost its warmth. Do you have any idea what it's like to rebuild everything after your father left us with nothing? I stepped closer. Dad didn't leave us. He killed himself. And he did it with his name shredded by debt you co-signed. She slapped the counter. Hard. Don't you dare bring your father into this! I flinched but didn't move. She composed herself, smoothing the edge of her robe. The White House was never going to be yours. It was always meant to be for something bigger. Bigger than what? Bigger than your ego. I exhaled through my teeth. Did you even plan on telling me? She looked at me, then finally really looked. Her eyes were cold. Not angry, not even defensive. Just resolved. If I had told you, she said slowly, you would have said no. And we couldn't afford that. She didn't answer. I reached into my coat and pulled out the title deed. I asked you once. Now I'm asking again, why is the White House registered under my name? Because if it weren't, she said calmly, no bank would have lent us a cent. Do you think they'd trust a widowed woman with inconsistent income and a 30-something man with no degree and a taste for designer suits? Her voice hardened. They trusted you, Alina. You were our ticket in. I felt dizzy, like the ground had decided to vanish beneath me. She kept going. You're smart, responsible, careful. You've always had the perfect record. And honestly, I thought you'd be flattered that we used it to build something. Flattered, I whispered. That house has created more wealth for this family in 2 years than your firm did in 5. I stepped back, as if even the air between us was now contaminated. That house, I said, is a crime scene. And then I made the mistake of raising my voice. I'm going to the police. I didn't mean to say it, not yet, not like that. But it came out raw, jagged, and irreversible. The room went silent, and then I heard it. Footsteps from upstairs. A second later, Nathan strolled into the kitchen, barefoot, coffee in hand, like he owned the goddamn place. Alina, he said, nodding. I thought I heard that angry tone. He kissed Mom on the cheek. She didn't flinch. He turned to me. You really planning to press charges? He asked, voice smooth. Yes. Okay, he said, setting his mug down. But before you go crusading, you might want to remember something. He walked over to the counter, pulled out a copy of one of the loan documents, and tapped the signature line. Whose name is this? Mine. Exactly, he smiled. And this? He held up a photo. A scanned PDF from my old email archive. Me at a signing table 2 years ago, pen in hand, next to a blurry outline of the document's top corner. He shrugged. Proof enough to muddy the waters. You think forged paperwork and a blurry picture will hold up in court? I think it's enough to delay the process. And while it drags out, your name's still on every legal document tied to every account. Do you really want the IRS digging into this mess with your signature front and center? My throat dried. He leaned in. I'm not the one with a clean record to lose. And just like that, the truth snapped into place. They weren't scared of being caught. They were counting on me being scared of what I'd lose in the process. I looked to Mom. She didn't speak. Just stared, her arms crossed, letting Nathan handle the talking like they'd rehearsed this. Let it go, he said gently, as if he were offering me a kindness. You walk away, we clean it up. No one gets hurt. Your credit recovers in a year. You keep your job. Everyone wins. Everyone except the truth. Except Dad. Except me? I grabbed the folder off the counter, eyes stinging. I'm not walking away. Nathan rolled his eyes. You always were the dramatic one. Say that again, I hissed, when you're in court. He laughed. Court. You think you'll survive discovery, you'll go down with us. Guilt by association. I'll take the risk, I said, backing toward the door, because I'd rather lose everything than keep pretending this family deserves my silence. He didn't answer, and my mother, just looked at me like I was a stranger. You always needed someone to blame, she said quietly. Even when you were little. No, I said. I needed someone to protect me. I just never realized I was the one I was waiting for. I left before they could say another word. Out the door, down the driveway, into the car, and when the door shut, the first sob broke from my throat like a cracked bell. Years of holding it in, years of pretending I was okay. I screamed once, just once, into the silence of my car. Then I opened my glove box, pulled out the voice recorder I'd hidden under my jacket, and hit stop. The last 24 minutes captured. Not just words. Confessions. I drove straight to my office. Not to work. To print. To scan. To backup. To begin. I opened a fresh hard drive and labeled it Quinn, Case 0. They had turned me into a name on a document. But now I was turning their lies into evidence. And this time I wasn't going to be quiet. Not for them. Not for anyone. The truth isn't something that crashes into you all at once. It comes like a trickle until you're drowning in it. That night, after I'd labeled the hard drive Case 0, I sat alone in my office. I didn't turn on any lights. I just let the city spill itself across the floor through the windows, casting fractured shadows on the wall. That hard drive sat in front of me like a loaded gun. And for some reason, what kept echoing wasn't Nathan's threat. It was the way my mother said your father left us with nothing. She always said it like a punchline, like a fact that justified every dark corner of our lives. But there was one thing she never said: how he left. Because we never told anyone the truth. Not the extended family. Not the neighbors. Not even the priest at the memorial. I was 17 when I found him. It was tax season. He had been in his study for almost 2 days straight. The door was locked, but I had the spare key. I remember the silence when I opened the door. Silence isn't supposed to have a shape. But that day it did. It was hanging, motionless, still wearing his wedding ring, still clutching the envelope addressed to me. Don't let them lie to you. But I let them. Because the next voice I heard was hers, my mother. We can't let anyone know what really happened, she'd said, hands trembling as she pulled the note from my grip. It'll ruin everything. And I nodded, because I was 17, because I didn't know what else to do. Because when you're 17 and the strongest person in your world falls, you follow the only one left standing. We buried him a week later. On the death certificate, it said cardiac failure. But in reality, it was debt. It was humiliation. It was a man who gave everything to a family that saw him as a burden the moment his credit score dropped. That night, I opened my personal archive and found something I hadn't looked at in years, a sealed folder labeled Dad. Final year. I opened it with hands I didn't know were shaking. Inside were balance sheets. Collection letters. A typed-out log of phone calls, notes he'd written about unpaid business expenses, and a failed partnership that left him owing 6 figures. And there, tucked in the back, was a contract. A real estate deal. The buyer, Nathan Devlin. The seller, David Quinn. Witnessed by Lydia Quinn. I'd never seen that document before. The date was 6 weeks before my father's death. The amount, $475,000. The listed value of the property, $1.2 million. He sold it for pennies. To Nathan. To family. And somehow Mom had signed as a witness. My blood went cold. I grabbed my phone and called the only person who could help me make sense of this. Carmen Hale, a former law school colleague turned independent attorney, who now handled whistleblower cases and internal fraud. She picked up on the second ring. Alina, I need you. We met the next morning at her brownstone office in the East Side District. Carmen didn't ask questions. She just pulled me into a hug, the kind that holds more than warmth, it holds memory. "You're shaking," she said, pouring coffee. "I'm unraveling," I replied. She gestured to the stack of papers in my bag. "Start with the worst." I handed her the fake loan documents, then the power of attorney I never signed, then my father's final contract. By the time she finished reading, she was silent. Not the kind of silence that meant confusion, the kind that meant calculation. "They bled him out," she said. "I was 17, I whispered. I didn't understand." "No, you did. You just couldn't fight it." She pulled her laptop closer and began pulling property records, pulling up state filings, old digital ledgers from years back. The deeper we went, the more horrifying it became. "Your father had 4 properties," she said. 3 of them transferred below market value in the 2 years before he died. All to Nathan or shell companies your mother signed on. He didn't sign over anything willingly. She looked up. "You're sure?" I read his journal. He thought those were temporary holding names. He was trying to salvage a deal that had collapsed and didn't want the bank to foreclose. He trusted them. "Classic laundering through kin," Carmen said. "You park the asset under a trusted relative to buy time, then forget to transfer it back. And now they're doing it to me." She nodded. "This isn't just betrayal, Alina. It's a pattern, a system." She paused, eyes narrowing. "How many assets are under your name right now?" I exhaled. 5 that I know of. "And you authorized how many?" 1. Maybe. Under duress. And not to this degree. She stood, pulled a dry erase marker, and started drawing a tree on the wallboard. At the top, Samantha Alina Quinn, clean credit asset holder. Branches led to the White House Estate, Trident West Development, Bridgepoint Wellness, Equinox Vista, the Kavanaugh Retreat Center, all paper tracked back to me. "And each one of these," she said, circling them, "is tied to an LLC with either your mother or Nathan listed as managing officer." She turned to me. "This is organized, not opportunistic. They've been building this for years." "And I was just the infrastructure," I said bitterly. Carmen tilted her head. "No, you were the credibility. That hit harder than I expected." She sat back down. "This is prosecutable. You've got document fraud, identity misuse, financial coercion, potential tax evasion, and if your father was misled under false pretenses, maybe even wrongful death if we get psychological forensics." I blinked. "That's a lot." She leaned in. "It's also why you can't go back to handling this emotionally. This isn't just about revenge." I stared down at my father's letter. "Don't let them lie to you. It's about clearing his name." Carmen nodded. "And protecting yours." The decision didn't come with fireworks, just a quiet nod, and then a breath that felt heavier than any I'd taken in years. "I want to file a suit," I said, "against both of them." Carmen didn't flinch. "Then we start by locking down your exposure. We'll file a financial protection injunction. Freeze the assets they moved under your name. Then we go public." I hesitated. "Public. They used your reputation to build an empire. Now we use your voice to tear it down." She paused, then added gently, "Are you ready to tell the truth about your dad?" I looked at her. My throat tightened. For a long time I thought telling that truth would destroy us. But now I realized it was the lie that did. "I'm ready." Carmen stood and reached out her hand. "Then let's burn this dynasty to the ground." As I walked out of her office, the wind hit sharp across my cheeks. But for once I didn't feel brittle. I felt awake. More than awake, I felt angry. And anger, I was learning, could be sacred. I opened my phone and opened a fresh folder, titled Dad's Debt Real Story. Inside I dropped every file. Then I created a second one, titled Justice, because this was never just about numbers. It was about everything they took and called it love. It was about the man they let die in shame, and the daughter they tried to silence with paperwork. They wanted to bury the truth, but I was about to dig it up with both hands. It started with the ledger. Not a dramatic moment, not some hidden will or dusty safe behind a painting, just a single yellowing invoice at the bottom of a misfiled stack in a back-office archive. I'd gone to my father's old company on instinct more than strategy. Quinn Financial Consulting had long been dissolved, swallowed by a larger firm during the recession. But the building still existed, rebranded, reorganized, but still standing. Carmen had advised me to focus on the legal filings, the money trails. But something in me needed to see the room where my father spent his final years. I needed to feel the dust, breathe the air, touch what he once touched. I wasn't sure what I was looking for until I found it. The receptionist, a young guy named Darian, had no idea who I was. But an older man in the hallway overheard my name and stopped cold. "You said Quinn?" I turned. "Yes. Elena Quinn. My father was—" "David Quinn," he finished for me softly. God, it's been years. His name was Walt Bryson. He was in his late 60s now. Retired, but still visited the building to stay sharp. He'd been my father's colleague, more than that, he said. They'd shared coffee secrets, battles against red ink. "I have something," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Not here. You mind walking?" We went 3 blocks to a coffee shop that smelled like oversteeped tea and furniture polish. He ordered decaf. I didn't order anything. "You came because something doesn't add up, didn't you?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "It started with identity theft, loans. But it's bigger now. I think my father knew something. Something about my mother, about Nathan, but he never said anything." Walt nodded as if he had expected that answer. He pulled out an envelope from his jacket, one so worn it looked older than me. "I kept this," he said, sliding it across the table, "because I couldn't let myself forget what they did to him." Inside were copies, blurred but legible, of internal complaints, signed by my father, dated 4 months before his death, accusing a Lydia Quinn of falsifying client accounts tied to a secondary investment vehicle, accusing her of diverting funds from client portfolios into private holdings, accusing her of hiding losses behind falsified gains. And then Walt said he went quiet, just like that, said it was handled, said not to speak of it again. Next time I saw him, he looked 20 pounds lighter and 30 years older. "And you didn't report it?" He sighed. "He begged me not to, said it would ruin you, that she'd take you away, said he needed time." I folded the papers, slowly pressing each crease like I was sealing a wound. "My mother didn't just drain my bank account," I whispered. "She bled him out too." Walt looked down. "I think she convinced him it would be temporary, that she'd fix it. And when he realized she wasn't going to, it broke him." It wasn't just the money. It was betrayal masquerading as partnership. I left the cafe with trembling hands, and a new question forming in the back of my throat like poison. Did my mother push him off the edge, or simply let him walk there alone? That night, I sat cross-legged on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by spreadsheets and printouts. Carmen had pulled years of archival tax data, but there was one thing we hadn't touched yet: my father's original account. I had access to it now through probate files and old financial statements. Most of the history was clean. Predictable salary deposits, mortgage payments, college fund transfers. But then I found it. A series of withdrawals, each in increments just below IRS reporting thresholds, pulled weekly over the course of 6 months. $8 $700, $9 $200, $9 $800. Where did they go? Each had a transaction memo QDV cap. At first, I assumed it was a bank's internal code. Then I looked closer. QDV, Quinn Devlin Ventures, a company Nathan had registered 2 years before Dad's death. A company Mom had co-signed as administrative advisor. A company I'd never even heard of. And yet my father had been pouring money into it, not investing, feeding it. I searched for any legal documentation that showed him as a stakeholder. Nothing. He'd never been added to the ownership file. No shares, no equity, just vanished money. It was the same pattern as what had happened to me, only slower, meaner, deadlier. I sat there for over an hour reading each transaction like it was a suicide note in disguise. He had trusted them. He had believed them when they said it was temporary. He had sacrificed everything: his reputation, his financial credibility, his health, for a house of cards they never intended to share. And then when he ran out of money, they let him fall. I met with Carmen the next morning, my face pale with fury. They didn't just bankrupt him, I said, throwing the printed spreadsheets on the table. They siphoned his account into a fake company and left him with the fallout. That's why he filed that complaint. That's why he looked like a ghost in the end. He wasn't depressed. He was dismantled. Carmen flipped through the sheets, lips pressed in a hard line. They never listed him because they planned to take it all. And they did. She looked up. You ready to go deeper? What do you mean? I mean, it's time to go beyond civil. This is criminal. She laid out a path, one that went straight into the Department of Financial Protection and White-Collar Crimes Division. We're going to have to open this like a fraud case with inherited consequences, she said. Posthumous financial abuse isn't formally codified, but we can file it under extended identity and fiduciary violation. My throat burned. You think they'll care about someone who's already dead? Carmen looked at me, really looked. They'll care if we make them. That afternoon, I drove back to the White House estate, not to enter, but to watch. I parked on the shoulder 2 blocks away, a pair of binoculars beside me. At 2:17 p.m., Nathan arrived in a gray Mercedes. He looked confident, unbothered. And then 15 minutes later, I saw her. My mother, dressed in white. Like this place belonged to her body. Like her guilt had never touched her bones. She walked into that estate like it owed her breath. And suddenly all the memories crashed in her shaking hands when she told me Dad had collapsed from stress. Her mournful tone at the funeral, the way she made me hide the truth like it was a disease. But I wasn't 17 anymore. I wasn't scared of her silence. I rolled down the window, pulled out my phone, and pressed record. This is Samantha Elina Quinn. I'm watching the White House estate. As of today, my legal claim is backed by documented proof that both Lydia Quinn and Nathan Devlin laundered funds through properties in my name, including but not limited to fraudulent withdrawals from my father David Quinn's private accounts in the final year of his life. I paused, then added quieter. They didn't just take money, they took his life. And now they want to do it again. They will not. I clicked stop. And for the first time since this began, I didn't feel like I was falling. I felt like I was climbing. Out of the lie, out of the fog, out of their story and back into mine. That night, I opened the folder where I kept all my father's old emails, the ones he sent me from the office, filled with silly jokes, finance trivia notes like, "Don't ever lend to someone who calls it a favor." One stood out. Sent 6 weeks before he died. Subject: keep copies of everything. Body: trust me, sweetheart. Paper saves people. I cried then. Not because I missed him, but because he was still trying to save me. Even now, even from the grave. And this time, I was going to listen. They had locked it behind 3 doors. But nothing about those doors was smarter than someone who had grown up watching how they locked things in this family. I waited until Sunday night when Nathan was across the state at a silent investor retreat, and my mother had her weekly spa appointment, which, judging by the invoices Carmen uncovered, was really just a laundering drop for cash transactions. I didn't break in. I borrowed the alarm code. Dad's birthday. It still worked. That told me everything I needed to know about how little they feared being caught. The law firm had been in the family for decades. Devlin and Quinn, discreet counsel for complex wealth. My great-uncle started it. Nathan's father modernized it. Now it was a front respectable, on the surface hollow underneath. I slipped inside. The hallway lights flickered once as if the building itself had a conscience. I went straight to the file room. Not the digital system, not the corporate drive, but the archive, the place they thought no one under 40 would dare check. There were rows of cabinets, a smell of toner and plastic sleeves, and then I found it. QDV Holdings, White House Estate Ownership Transfer Agreement. A thick folder, tied shut with red string. Like a secret too heavy to breathe. I opened it. The contract was dated October 3rd, 2021. It named the seller Quinn Devlin Ventures, the buyer Lydia Quinn, the legal transferee Elina Quinn. My eyes narrowed. There on the last page was my signature. It looked like mine, slanted slightly upward, looped Q, sharp crossbar on the T, but it was too perfect. Too mechanical, like someone had traced it under light. Something pulsed in my skull. I flipped to the notary page. Witnessed by Dr. Maria Vassal. I froze. Maria Vassal wasn't a notary. She was my primary care physician in 2017. Suddenly, I remembered the intake form the year I had pneumonia and had to sign my entire medical history by hand. A document I'd never seen again. They didn't just forge my name, they harvested it. Pulled it from somewhere I never expected to protect. Somewhere I thought was mine alone. I took photos of every page. Then, just to be sure, I printed an extra copy and folded it into the lining of my coat. I wasn't going to risk someone erasing this from existence. As I backed out of the archive, a motion sensor clicked. I held still. No alarm. Just a printer waking from sleep. I nearly laughed. This was their fortress. Paper. Silence. Dark. But silence was exactly what I came to break. The next morning, I sat across from Carmen and laid out everything. This, she said, fingers drumming the signature page, is felony-level fraud. It's not just the signature, I said. Look at the notary. She's not even licensed. Carmen squinted. Maria Vassal, doctor, my doctor. They lifted my signature from an old medical consent form. Her face tightened. They used a health document to forge a real estate transfer. Yes. And they filed it as part of the financial trust backing the property. I nodded. Carmen leaned back. That's premeditated identity theft, document fraud, abuse of fiduciary trust, possibly conspiracy to commit financial misrepresentation. You think it's enough? Carmen gave me a look like I'd insulted the law itself. Alina, she said, this isn't just enough. This is the thread that unravels the whole damn tapestry. We met with a handwriting expert 2 days later. His name was Leo Epstein. Former FBI, now worked private out of Brooklyn Heights. He sat across from me with 2 sheets of paper, one the signature from the property file, the other my real signature samples. I can tell you right now, he said, this was lifted digitally, traced and printed via laser onto the page. How do you know? Micro shifts in pressure, no natural flow, no ink bleeding at the ends. Look. He slid the page under a lens. See that break in the middle of the Q? That only happens with scan overlays. He handed me a certificate of finding before I even asked. Don't worry, he added. I've testified in 7 fraud cases this year alone. Yours won't even be the ugliest. I wanted to laugh, but it felt like poison trying to leave my lungs. They had taken my name and weaponized it, and now I was taking it back. We filed the case 2 days later at the Financial Court of the State of New York. Carmen moved faster than I thought possible. She submitted under a clause for emergency injunction citing both fraudulent ownership claim and potential destruction of financial evidence. She compiled the false signature documents. The timeline of property ownership shifts. Screenshots of tax data rerouted to QDV Holdings. Witness statements from Walt and Dr. Vassal. The voice recording of Nathan's smug threat, the medical form from 2017. And then she handed me a hard copy of the case file, Alina Quinn versus Lydia Quinn and Nathan Devlin. My name had never looked so clean, so sharp, so mine. This is the first real stone, Carmen said. They've been building a glass castle. Now we're throwing rocks. The court date was set, 3 weeks from filing. But in those 3 weeks, I knew they'd move. They wouldn't wait to be served. They'd panic, try to erase, try to discredit me. I prepared for war. Every night I backed up evidence to 3 different drives. I stored copies in a locker in New Jersey. I emailed myself timestamps and cloud receipts. But nothing felt as powerful as that file, thick, heavy, and full of my own name reclaimed. I saw my mother again 1 week before the hearing. She didn't know I'd be there. It was a gala at the Whitmore Foundation. She came in draped in red silk, arm hooked in Nathan's. They looked like success incarnate. Fake pearls, real blood. When she saw me, her face barely flickered. But she approached. Alina, she said, like nothing had ever happened. What a surprise. I'm sure it is, I replied. She looked me over. You look determined. I am. Nathan slid beside her. You know most people would kill to own what you own. But I don't own it, do I asked. You do, illegally. His smile didn't fade. Let's not get dramatic. I'm done with silence, I said. The lawsuit is filed. I'll see you in court. They stiffened. Finally, their castle had felt the first quake. As I walked away, I didn't turn back. I didn't need to. I knew they were watching me, and for once it wasn't because I was useful. It was because they were afraid. That night I went home, took a long shower, and sat at my desk writing the first page of a letter. It wasn't for the court. It wasn't for Carmen. It was for my father. Dad, I wrote you tried to protect me once by staying quiet, but this time I'm protecting you by speaking. And then in my clearest handwriting, I wrote one line, I'm not your shadow anymore. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in the silence. The kind that clung to wood panels and marble columns. The kind that sharpened every glance like glass. People didn't speak loudly here. They whispered. And when they looked at me, they whispered even softer. I sat at the plaintiff's bench in a charcoal suit that Carmen had picked. She said black was too angry. Blue was too soft. Charcoal said I see everything and I'm not afraid. Nathan and my mother sat opposite. Lydia Quinn in pearls and practiced grace, her hands folded like a widow at confession. Nathan in a tailored navy suit chewing the inside of his cheek like he was bored. The judge entered. Gavel! Introductions. Then, the dance began. Nathan's lawyer, Leon Marcus, a man who looked like a walking mortgage contract, stood and tried to paint me as confused, ungrateful, possibly manipulated. He said things like, Alina Quinn was never denied access to these properties. She benefited from the very wealth she now seeks to undo. There is no evidence, credible or contextual, that suggests malicious intent from the defendants. Then came the line that made Carmen's jaw twitch. She is misremembering her own history in pursuit of vindication she cannot earn from within. He meant I was making it all up for attention. Carmen stood without waiting for the judge to call on her. With permission, Your Honor. The judge nodded. She stepped forward, calm as a blade. I'd like to enter into Record Exhibit 17B. She held up a USB. The court will find in this audio recording a private conversation between Ms. Alina Quinn and her mother Lydia Quinn, obtained with full consent under New York one-party recording law. She clicked play. There was no music, no background noise, just my voice shaky and my mother's voice clear and cold. You used my name because you don't know how to keep property safe. I did what I had to do. That wasn't your choice to make. If you're not strong enough to protect what's yours, then maybe it was never yours to begin with. I held it for you. You should be grateful. Silence. Then the audio stopped, and the courtroom didn't breathe. Even the judge sat still. Nathan leaned forward as if about to speak, then didn't. Carmen let the silence hang. It did more than any sentence she could have added. During the recess, news cameras had already gathered. By the time we returned, the gallery was packed. Reporters, bloggers, TikTok lawyers, daughter sues mother over $2 million property fraud. Bloodlines and balance sheets. White House heist, a family affair. Somewhere between flashbulbs, I saw a familiar face. Dr. Vassal. She had come. She nodded at me. And I knew this wasn't just about paper trails or forged signatures anymore. This was about truth in a house full of secrets. Nathan was next. He tried to charm the room. Slick hair, confident tone. But his answers danced around specifics. Did you know the signature was forged? The judge asked. I wasn't involved in that particular contract. Did you benefit financially? I received standard disbursements. Who authorized the use of Alina Quinn's medical records for notarization? I can't confirm the origin of those documents. He slipped. Just enough? Carmen leaned in and wrote one word on her pad: perjury. We'd keep that in our pocket. For now. When it was my turn, I didn't look at Nathan. I looked straight ahead, right at the judge. I didn't come here today to break a family I began. I came here because it was already broken. I just finally stopped pretending I didn't see the cracks. The judge watched me with eyes that didn't blink much. I continued. My father died thinking he failed us. But he didn't. He was pushed aside, silenced, erased. I've spent most of my life trying to fill in the holes he left behind. And now I know why those holes were never meant to be filled. Because they were made deliberately. Carmen nodded. I wasn't shaking. I thought I would be. But this wasn't fear. It was fire. I don't want revenge, I said. Not even justice in the cinematic sense. I want truth on the record. I want the man my mother once called her husband to be acknowledged for the integrity he tried to hold on to. I want the woman I once called mother to face the weight of what she's done. I took a breath, and I want my name back. At that, the judge finally looked down and made a note. Nathan swallowed hard. Even my mother flinched. 48:30. The press asked questions as we exited. Carmen shielded me as best she could, but I answered one. A reporter shouted, "Alina, is there anything you'd say to your mother now?" I paused, then said, I hope one day she realizes that love isn't ownership. It's accountability. Flashbulbs popped. And then I walked down the steps not as Alina the daughter, not as Alina the victim, but as Alina Quinn plaintiff survivor and truth teller. There's a strange silence that follows after a building collapses. Not the sound of rubble or gasps. It's the silence of breath being held, because everyone knows something big just fell, and no one wants to be the first to say it. That was the silence that hung over Nathan's face when his accounts were frozen. It happened the morning after the hearing. Carmen's team had submitted the forensic audit and banking trails to the state and federal authorities just hours earlier. No warning, no knock. Just a push notification Nathan didn't see coming. Access denied. Account locked due to suspected financial fraud. He tried to withdraw cash. Declined. Tried again. Declined. He walked into the bank wearing his entitlement like a shield and walked out gray in the face. It was just the beginning. The Federal Bureau of Financial Crimes opened an official file under Operation Nightglass. The name was too poetic for the brutality of what was uncovered. Shell companies linked to Nathan. Payments routed through offshore crypto wallets. And at the heart of it, Lydia Quinn, age 62, widow community patron, businesswoman summoned by federal investigators. Not invited, summoned. And for the first time in decades, my mother didn't have the power to refuse the room she was called into. The Ngoy Nha Trang was shut down by noon. I stood across the street and watched as federal agents sealed the iron gates with yellow tape and silver bolts. The front lawn, the one I had designed in spring with hydrangeas and fairy lights, was now trampled under black boots. A red sticker glared from the front glass property under federal seizure. Once a place sold to the world as sanctuary, wellness, and luxury, now just a crime scene. I didn't cry. I just kept thinking, this is where they said I wasn't welcome. This is the house I built for ghosts to live in. And finally the ghosts had names. Nathan tried to disappear, deleted his socials, left the city. But there's something poetic about digital footprints like ink on snow. He couldn't hide. Every transaction, every wire transfer, every hotel suite he paid with someone else's name, it all surfaced. The media wasn't kind, but they weren't cruel either. They were hungry. BuzzFeed ran a piece Nepo babies and the fraud they inherit. The New York Times went darker blood money, the matriarchs of Manhattan. But the one that stayed with me came from a podcast host named Dana Frey. When your last name is heavier than your silence. Then came the women. 3 of them, one by one. They came forward with statements and records and shame that had been collecting dust like mildew in a locked cabinet. One was a single mom approached by Lydia to co-invest in a property portfolio that never existed. Another, a former student of my mother's charity, who owed her a favor and was asked to sign standard compliance paperwork. The last one was once Lydia's best friend. She hadn't spoken to anyone about it in 12 years. They all had one thing in common: they trusted her. And they were all left holding debts they didn't sign up for. Hearing their stories was like watching a mirror crack from the edges. Each confession chipped away at the image I'd spent my whole life protecting. And all I could do was whisper, "Me too." There was no verdict yet. That would take months. But the world had decided long before the court. My inbox filled with strangers. Some offered sympathy. Some wanted interviews. Some, God help them, wanted to know if I planned to start a foundation. But none of it mattered as much as one envelope I received that week. It was handwritten, no return address. Inside was a photo of my father in front of his first bakery. He was smiling, holding a baguette like a trophy. And on the back, someone had written, "He never stopped loving you. He just didn't know how to protect you." There was no signature, but the handwriting was familiar. I didn't tell anyone. I just kept the photo in my coat pocket like a charm. I returned to the house I grew up in. It felt smaller now. Not physically, spiritually. The hallway echoed too much. The kitchen smelled like a ghost town. I lit a candle. One of the old lavender ones my father used to hide in drawers when my mother said he was too sentimental. I brought his photo to the dining room table and sat down with a notepad. And I rewrote my will. At 32, no longer a daughter, no longer a pawn, just me. I crossed out names that didn't deserve inheritance, left instructions for a small scholarship in my father's name, and I added one line that took me half an hour to write: "Let no debt outlive the truth." That night, I didn't drink wine, didn't post anything, didn't call Carmen. I just opened the window, let the city noise bleed in, and I whispered almost to myself, "It's not over." But it's finally not hidden. And for the first time since the email arrived, I slept, with both eyes closed. I never thought silence could be this loud. It was my first seminar. The room wasn't full, but it felt full. Of truth. Of things that had been kept behind polite smiles and family dinners. The event was titled "Inheritance Without Permission When Family Becomes a Financial Trap." I sat alone on a simple wooden stool, a glass of water next to me. No podium, no slides, just my voice. "I'm not here as a financial advisor today," I began. "I'm here as a daughter who learned too late that love and loyalty are not always the same thing." I paused. A woman in the second row wiped her eyes, and then they started sharing, one by one. A retired teacher whose brother stole her pension. A man whose parents used his social security number since he was 13. A single mom whose name was used to apply for 4 credit cards by her ex-husband, and she never saw a dollar. I wasn't shocked. I was heartbroken. Because every story started the same way: it was family. I thought I was helping. That night, I opened my inbox. There were over 3,000 messages. Subject lines like, "I thought I was alone. Thank you for saying what I couldn't. My mom used my identity. I haven't told anyone. Until now. Can you tell me what to do?" I read until my eyes hurt, until the words started blending. But I didn't stop, because every message was a voice rising out of the silence I used to sit in. Some were desperate. Some were hopeful. Some just wanted to be heard without being fixed. And every few emails I saw echoes of myself, different names, same betrayal. But there was one message that stopped me cold. It was from a 14-year-old, a girl named Jasmine. Ms. Elena. I don't know if this is weird, but my mom always asks me to sign things. I don't know what they mean. One time she said, "Don't ask questions, you're too young." My friend says it's not normal, but I don't want to get her in trouble. How do I know if someone is using me or if they just love me and don't want to explain things? It was typed with spelling mistakes and honesty. And it took me 10 minutes to breathe right again. I wrote back, "Hi, Jasmine. I want you to know that asking this question is brave. Here's the truth. If someone truly loves you, they won't be afraid to let you understand. They won't hide behind your trust. They will want you to know. If someone says, 'Don't ask questions,' that's when you ask twice. You deserve truth, not silence. Love isn't a reason to blindfold someone. It's a reason to take the blindfold off. Stay curious. Stay brave. Elena." And I cried after I sent it. Not because I was sad, but because I realized I had just told Jasmine the very thing I'd needed to hear when I was 14. And no one had said it to me. I added a new section to my next seminar, "Questions Kids Should Be Allowed to Ask." And I made laminated cards, bright yellow ones, with 10 questions printed on them. Things like, "What am I signing? Is this my debt or yours? Can I talk to someone else about this? Do I have a right to say no? Why do I feel scared?" I gave them out for free. At schools, at community centers, at grocery stores with posters. Some parents got mad. Some teachers said it was too much. But the kids, they folded the cards and kept them in their backpacks like treasure maps. At the end of one workshop, a boy, maybe 12, raised his hand and asked softly, "But if I ask, will they stop loving me?" I looked at him for a long moment, and then I said, "If someone really loves you, they won't make you choose between love and honesty. They'll help you ask better questions. They won't punish you for wanting to understand. And if they do punish you, that's not love. That's control dressed up in nice clothes." He nodded, didn't smile, but something in his shoulders relaxed. And that was enough. That was everything. By the end of that month, I'd spoken in 5 states. People offered to fund me, to turn the seminars into a brand. But I wasn't building a brand. I was building a vocabulary for freedom. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to tell the truth, even if that truth made someone I loved uncomfortable. Even if it meant letting go of who I thought I had to protect. Even if it meant walking away from people who called themselves my blood. Because blood can drown you too. And healing doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes it means permission to leave. And I had finally given that to myself. I hadn't seen her in 18 months. Not in court, not in the press, not even in my dreams, which had gone quiet for once. And then a letter, handwritten, folded neatly, no return address, just my name. "If you want to come, I will be at your father's grave. The 15th, noon, Mom." No explanation, no apology. It arrived the morning of the 13th. I stared at it for an hour, held it to my chest, then to the sunlight, half hoping it would disappear like secrets do when exposed. But it didn't. The cemetery was small, quiet. No marble gates or manicured rows, just grass that grew uneven and truth that didn't care who was watching. I came alone. No driver, no makeup, no armor. She was already there. A gray coat over a prison-issued dress. Her hair was thinner, but her spine still straight. She stood like someone who had never known how to bend. Until now. She turned as I approached. No hug, no tears. "Just you look like him." I nodded. She looked down at the headstone, and I followed. It was the same stone I'd chosen years ago. His name etched cleanly. No middle name, no beloved husband. Just Marcus E. Rain, 1964, 2007, "Truth is never a liability." That was mine. The last line. She didn't argue when I chose it. Maybe she knew. Maybe that was her guilt's first surrender. We stood in silence for 3 full minutes. I counted them. 3 minutes where we were neither mother and daughter, nor accuser and accused. Just 2 women staring at the ruin of a man neither of us had protected in time. Then she spoke, quietly, without shaking. I used to think strength was keeping everything inside, holding it all, so no one else would have to. I didn't know that turns people into shadows. I didn't respond, because some things don't require replies, only remembrance. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a tiny folded square. A photo, worn at the edges. It was of the 3 of us. Me, age 6, grinning with ice cream all over my face. Dad behind me, hands on my shoulders. Mom beside us, smiling like she used to smile. Before fear taught her how to weaponize love. She handed it to me. "I kept this," she said, "even when I was pretending I didn't miss either of you." I held it. Didn't cry. Didn't smile either. Just held it. I didn't plan to say anything, but I did. Softly. I went back to the house. The White House. They locked the doors, boarded the windows. But it still smells like lemon wax and old betrayal. She closed her eyes. I continued. "I left something there. On the doorstep. A photo of you and me. But the one I brought today," I pulled it from my bag. A framed picture of the property now shut down. Boards nailed across the doors. A government seal slapped across the iron gate. And beneath it, a black and white photo of Dad. In his suit, in his quiet dignity. I laid it on the grave. And beside it, a single white lily. No words carved in it. Just silence. I turned to leave. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the grass in our silence. She didn't stop me, didn't beg, didn't explain, and I didn't turn around, because closure doesn't always look like healing. Sometimes it looks like a daughter walking away. Not because she's angry, but because she finally knows who she is without needing her mother's permission. And that knowing is louder than any apology. They called her name from the stage. Alina Rose. The auditorium was modest, no chandeliers, no suits, no investors. Just a community center gymnasium in Queens filled with women in second-hand blazers, men with nervous smiles, and teenagers holding notepads tighter than dreams. She walked up to the front in heels, scuffed by life, holding no notes, just the memory of everything she had been through. And then she spoke. "We don't all start at zero," she said. "Some of us inherit overdrafts in silence, invisible debts, emotional invoices, liabilities disguised as love." Eyes lifted, pens paused, no one coughed. "And if we don't learn the math of trust, someone else will calculate our worth for us." Applause didn't follow immediately. It wasn't that kind of crowd. But something softer rose like recognition. At 72 Sondre, an email came in. It was from the National Alliance for Victims of Familial Financial Abuse. They wanted Alina to become a lead advisor for their new program, Inherited Silence. She stared at the screen. The blinking cursor was calm. For the first time in years, she didn't hesitate. "Yes," she typed, and meant it. That same evening, she found herself sorting through an old box of her father's belongings she had stored in a weathered closet for too long. Beneath his broken glasses and yellowed paycheck stubs was an envelope labeled only "For Alina, when she's ready." Inside was a letter, dated 9 months before his death. "You were always the quiet accountant of the family. Even when you were 7, you'd collect the coins from the couch cushions and line them up by color. I used to laugh. Now I know you were already learning to bring order to chaos. If this finds you and I'm not there, just know one thing. You are the most beautiful balance I ever made." "Dad!" She didn't cry. She folded the letter slowly. Her hands didn't shake. Her father hadn't left her inheritance. He left her clarity. At 74 Beauzero, she walked past a bookstore downtown. In the display window, a paperback titled The Borrowed Daughter caught her eye. She blinked, then laughed. The author's name was hers. The publisher had insisted on the title even though she'd hated it. Inside the store, a small book club was gathering. She walked past them to the back to the children's section. There, under soft lamps, sat the boy. The same boy who'd once asked her, "How do you know if someone you love is using you?" He was sketching again. This time a tall building, slender with arches and glass. He looked up. "Miss Alina," he said, eyes hopeful. "Do you think bad people can turn good again?" She paused, sat beside him. "I think..." She began choosing her words like she'd once chosen contracts. "If they're willing to pay back everything they took with their heart, not just their money, then yes, I believe they can." He smiled, returned to his drawing. At 76:30, the camera drifts outside the glass window. We see Alina sitting by the child, gently pointing to one of his lines like a teacher guiding without stealing the pencil. A quiet score plays piano single notes. The frame freezes on her hand, resting beside the child's. We hear her voice again, final. "We all carry accounts. Some emotional, some financial. But healing is when the books finally balance and you choose not to pass the debt forward."